Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 8th of August, 8/8. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can easily do that by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. It's your statewide resource for your local forecast and warning information, as well as hydrologic information for your favorite rivers and streams across the area. And of course, if there is a tsunami or an earthquake, you can always check with the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska for the latest information. You'll find links from that to the Palmer Center there at weather.gov/Alaska. And if you can't find what you're looking for, anytime, send me an email, david.snyder@noaa.gov. I'd love to see your pictures from your village and your part of Alaska anytime as well. Let's take a look at some of the more hazardous weather. Through the rest of tonight, red flag warnings are in effect for the areas in northern and central parts of southeast. This is a fire weather concern, and you're saying, well, really, fire weather in southeast? Yeah, conditions have been dry, but on top of that, they have been windy today. Gusts through parts of Stevens Passage and for many locations on the inside passage itself have been fairly blustery and running around 40 knots at times in some cases. And as long as those winds stay up, the fire danger stays right up there with it. So be mindful of that. Make sure that you are checking in with your local fire weather officials before doing any open burning. And as always, be careful with fire in that area. The other thing we're watching is regions around the upper Kuskokwim into generally north of the Alaska Range into the interior are looking at significant rises in high water concerns over the next 48 hours there. And of particular note is the Berg Glacier Dam Lake that's draining into the Gandil and Bering rivers there around Cordova. And while that won't affect a whole lot of folks in the area besides mariners perhaps very close to the coastline, it is mainly due to the very warm weather, and a regular release every couple years or so is expected from glaciers like this. And in this case, a melt pond around the glacier is finally releasing all of that water. It's overtopped or it's undercut the glacier, not sure which. But that excessive amount of water is draining quickly and bringing rises up for the Gandil and Bering rivers. Now, up north, that's not the case. This is mainly due to recent rains that have really saturated soils in the region, affecting places like Denali National Park and Healy. And we expect to see another opportunity for that as we go ahead in the next 48 hours there. So watching for flooding perhaps across the southern parts of the interior and on the north-facing slopes of the Alaska Range and into areas around Healy and to the west. Fire danger, well, that tracks right along with it. Most areas across the northern interior and the west are now pretty much out of the fire danger season. But you can see areas around Haines and Skagway down to Juneau still listed as high, and today's one of those days for sure with the red flag warning and wind in place. The Copper River Valley, parts of Prince William Sound, and just on the western side, let's say, and into areas around Moose Pass and Resurrection Pass, and all the way up into the Susitna Valley, including areas around Anchorage, are still really dry. Because of that, fire danger remains high. And as again, said before, make sure you check in with your fire weather officials before you do any open burning, and always be careful with fire. As we look at the visible satellite picture, my favorite, boy, you get to see a lot of cool stuff. And today we're looking out to the west. This is actually the infrared satellite picture. You can see a stream of moisture working across the Chukchi Sea and a disturbance working its way across the Beaufort that's going to lend itself to bringing some cooler air into the central and northern interior. As it does that, it is going to be capable of producing more precipitation across southern parts of the interior in the coming days, thus that flood potential there. No watches, warnings, or advisories out just yet. And you can also see the effects of training areas of low pressure across the west, little ripples that are moving northward across a high pressure ridge that's sitting across south and western Alaska and really helping to keep temperatures warm in the Bering all the way up into the Chukchi Sea. And as that moisture is lifting northward, that colder air is dropping southward, meeting up with the moisture in place and helping to wring that out across southern parts of the interior and the Alaska Range. Here's a look at the visible there, and I got a little ahead of myself a moment ago, but now you can see in even greater detail all the waves working their way into the Bering Sea. Several of those are working their way northward, and each one of those ripples is capable of producing a little bit of wind and a little bit more precipitation, especially once it gets out here across the interior. Now, across areas in the western Gulf, low pressure here very clearly swirling up the moisture, literally pulling the air off of southeastern Alaska and south central Alaska and into this zone, and that's helping to keep things very dry. So this vacuum, this Mother Nature vacuum cleaner, really just pulling in that drier air and really chipping away at the clouds across the north and the western Gulf, bringing just a beautiful day to Kodiak Island and all the surrounding archipelago, and Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, all the way into south central. Hardly a cloud in the sky across the region. Certainly not the case across the west or the north today, as that moisture is trying to fill in the gaps that is being left behind by the air moving out to sea. Here's a look at the weather map, and low pressure is the system we're seeing here, and the low that you saw in the satellite picture spinning around right about here, 1,014 millibars there. A beautiful day for southeast by and large. Areas of light rain and some drizzle across the north slope with low pressure across the Chukchi coast, 1,014 millibars. Pockets of fog there across some of your passes in over the Bering Strait communities. And high pressure across the southern Bering, 1,029 millibars, is keeping that southerly flow working its way up across the central and western chain, all the way into the St. Matthew region, St. Lawrence Island, and the west coast. Some of that's working its way in from the north now and then draining back out over the higher train and then drying up as it works its way into the west coast. Low pressure sits across the central and eastern interior at 1,017 millibars tonight. Behind this, a little burst of cooler air that works its way into the central and the upper Yukon valleys there. Rain and drizzle will still be a part of your weather. Low pressure sits across the eastern Gulf, really not moving very much, keeping things fairly dry, but the wind should start to settle down for you in southeast overnight. High pressure will sit across the Yukon Delta, 1,028 millibars there. Out to the west, a southerly flow for the central and western Aleutians. And that's going to start to change up our next weather system out in the west. You can see that gradually creeping in on Friday. The cold air across the north drops southward just a little bit, almost making it to the Alaska Range, but not quite tonight. Areas south of the range will remain clear, dry, maybe a light breeze if that. High pressure ridge across the Bristol Bay communities and east of the Pribilofs holds at 1,026 millibars for your Friday. And not a whole lot of change across southeast, though we don't expect to see the wind back in place tomorrow that we're having in place this afternoon. Now, along the boundary, that's bringing us the cool air across the eastern and northern interior. I won't be surprised to see showers and thunderstorms develop in the heat of the day. Conditions will warm up, especially south of this boundary. That could include Fairbanks out toward the Alaska Range, and maybe as far south as the Talkeetna Eagle, Northway, you'll be in that zone as well as the parts of the Yukon Flats. And with cold air at the top part of the atmosphere, the bottom part, if that warms up, that makes a perfect setup for that warm air bubble that you see, or that you could imagine, let's say, in the form of maybe a hot air balloon wanting to rise through that colder air. It makes it very easy to do that, and when that happens, you know it's happening because we start to develop cumulus clouds. Those are the precursors to the towering shower and thunderstorm clouds that are a lot more prevalent in the interior during the summer months. Out across the west, a southerly flow for the west coast. Well, we'll keep that light rainfall and drizzle slowly creeping eastward as we head into Saturday. Not a whole lot of change across the west. The high pressure ridge is still anchored across southwest. We'll have a few more showers across the Seward Peninsula into the Kotzebue Sound and Shishmaref region, and then westward toward Gamble and Savunga. Low pressure will sit across the western end of the chain, 998 millibars there, with a front pressing eastward into that ridge. This is going to try and break down, but what it looks like will happen is this may shift southward a little bit more. It will keep that south and westerly flow over most of south central, the Gulf, and even southeast, and conditions will remain generally warm and dry for many locations here, while the coolest air will try and make another run in from the north, but likely be shunted off to the east. So we'll keep conditions with southwesterly flow in the south, northwesterly flow in the north, and probably looks like conditions will stay on the warmer side for the next few days. For southeast tonight, 50s it looks like, south central, lower 50s, 58 in Kodiak, mid-50s around Bristol Bay, 54 in Bethel, 48 in Nome. Looks like temps could be 10 degrees cooler than that. Utqiagvik 38, 41 in Kaktovik. Fairbanks, you're looking at temps in the upper 40s and lower 50s. High temperatures tomorrow, still fairly warm, especially south of the Brooks Range, 60s and 70s. In fact, some parts of the Susitna Valley could be back in the 80s around Talkeetna. Upper 60s, low 70s for southeast. Haines and Skagway, the big winters tomorrow with temps in the mid 70s. 63 around Sandpoint, 61 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. St. Paul, St. George, 55. St. Lawrence Island, about 53, and 57 in Nome. Overnight lows on Saturday, still fairly mild, a little bit cooler for some around Gustavus and Juneau in the 40s there, otherwise almost 60 in Ketchikan and around Annette. Lower 50s if you're going to camp out in Prince William Sound, Cordova and Valdez. 56 in Kodiak, about the same in Anchorage and Kenai. 51 for the Middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks. 49 in Tanana itself and 44 in Eagle. Looks like temps on the North Slope could drop into the upper 30s, still above freezing though. Wainwright 46, 50 in Nome, 52 in Shish, and 51 in McCormick. Let's take it out a little bit further as we go into Saturday afternoon. Lower 70s for many in the interior and mid 70s as you move southward along the Kenai. Upper 60s for most in southeast. Lower 70s for Bristol Bay. Bethel about 65. Kotzebue 61. And Point Hope, Point Lay still holding in the lower 50s. The 8 to 14 day temperature trend ending in late August shows that cool air will continue to be possible across parts of the eastern interior north of Fairbanks. Northwest, west, and southwest conditions stay warmer than average, including southeast. The trend for drier weather sets up across.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to your aviation weather now. We expect to see some lingering shower, maybe even a brief early thunderstorm across some parts of the Yukon Flats. Remember, there's a disturbance dropping southward that's going to initiate a lot of the lift needed to get those shower and thunderstorm towers building quickly during the day across some of the Yukon Flats and the upper Yukon Valley. Behind that boundary, we'll see widespread IFR for the North Slope and many of your Brooks Range passes as you head out to the west through the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, and all the way down the west coast. And through the chain, we expect to see IFR conditions there and also across southern parts of the outer coast of southeast with marginal conditions across central and southern parts of the Panhandle. That's going to move around a little bit as low pressure is kind of drifting north and northwest, and the overall flow is still sending a lot of that slop into the Gulf, but meeting up with a lot of dry air. So you're going to see a lot of VFR across Kodiak Island, south central, all the way through the Copper River Basin, southwest, and into most of the interior. You'll notice a lot of improvement across some of our northern regions there as that first wave drops south and east. There's another one behind it. You'll see that in a minute. And again, IFR conditions for Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, all the way through the Pribilofs and into the central and western chain. As you see, shower and thunderstorm activity is possible tomorrow afternoon. Again, a lot of that will be ahead of that disturbance as it moves south and southeast. We expect a lot of that to diminish very quickly as we head into Saturday morning, with IFR lingering across the Beaufort Seacoast. Some holes there across the Chukchi Coast for Saturday morning. Watch for areas along the Brooks Range summits to start to fill in quickly with IFR. And IFR really doesn't budge much across the west coast all the way to about Nunivak Island, and then missing most of our southwestern Cape. So Bristol Bay may be okay Saturday morning. And across the north and coast, or the Bering Sea coast of the Alaska Peninsula, all the way west, IFR there. Most of the concerns there across southeast should clear up a little bit. Marginal to IFR conditions expected there. No big change in the general zone of limited visibility or ceilings across the eastern Gulf for Saturday afternoon, but you'll notice it does not seem to impinge on southeast at all. Across the interior and most of southwest, you'll see VFR flying. Look for marginal conditions for the Seward Peninsula. IFR sneaking into places like Unalakleet and maybe all the way down toward Ammonok, Makoriuk, and then lingering just south of the Pribilofs to Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Most of your southwestern Capes, Kodiak, and the Alaska Peninsula should be mostly VFR for your Saturday. Here's your past conditions now. For Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we expect to see an IFR start, leaning over towards some improvement during the day as that first wave clears over the region. There's another one behind it, so you're going to see some changes as we head into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, VFR conditions there. Marginal weather for most of Rainy Pass and Windy Pass through the day. Isabel Pass looking to be marginal for your Friday. Mentasta Pass, VFR watching for convection in the afternoon. Tanita Pass, more of the same. VFR flying through most of the day. We'll watch for some shower or storm activity in the region. Portage Pass, VFR, and it looks like Chilkoot and White Pass ought to be A-OK really for most of your Friday. The surface freezing line is still way to the north, but if you haven't looked at the maps carefully in the next couple days, one thing to watch, the jet stream, which you'll see in a minute, is on this northwest trajectory moving across northern parts of northern Alaska. With that, we are going to get a taste of some cooler air moving through, and it's going to happen quickly And it looks like these values should be coming down in the next couple days. 6 to 8 to 10,000 feet still over most of mainland Alaska, 10 to 12,000 feet across southeast and out across the west. No big change for the Bering. Very warm air still hovering out there. Icing potential, really not concerned about this just yet, but we do see some moisture that's going to be moving through that could produce some isolated moderate icing potential, but generally above 10,000 feet. Out ahead of this, our really big concern would be just some shower and storm coverage that starts to pop up ahead of that disturbance moving quickly to the south and east. Here's the jet, and you can see the pattern here. Imagine this is a kid's slide on the playground. This is just allowing that colder air to drop slowly down into the northern parts of the lower 48. On the other side of this, we're still in warm and summery conditions thanks to high pressure pumping in that southerly flow. But on the other side, a taste of maybe some fall-like weather trying to sneak in to northern parts of Alaska. At 9,000 feet, high pressure ridge across the west coast, southerlies across the Bering, bringing us westerlies into the interior and northerly flow that's keeping things dry across south central and a large part of southeast. Very light winds there. Light northerly flow across the interior at 3,000 feet. There's that northwesterly wind trying to cut in across the north slope, and generally speaking, high pressure out across the west coast is keeping things dry in most places for most people. Southerly winds across the west, keeping a southerly flow working across the Bering Sea, 25 to 30 knots. Most winds across the mainland remain fairly light. So what about turbulence for your Friday? No big concerns right now. We're going to see some changes probably Saturday and Sunday as those disturbances start to move in across the north, but for right now, below 4,000 feet, considerable moderate across the western Aleutians, and watch for convection.
Weekend between the planets. Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight. Hey Dean, what's the two largest planets in our solar system?
Easy. Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is a whopping 88,000 miles in diameter, while Saturn's rings span about 200,000 miles from tip to tip. Compared to the Earth, they are both humongous planets.
So you'd be excited to know that Jupiter and Saturn are in the perfect spots to see this week after dark.
Awesome. And I heard a rumor that they will have some company.
That's right. The waxing moon will be passing by Jupiter and then Saturn Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
What are we talking about? Let's show you. Okay, we have our sky set up for Thursday, August 8th at around 10 p.m. facing south. Finding the planets Jupiter and Saturn right now are a piece of cake. And the waxing gibbous moon over there can help too.
Jupiter is easy to find since it's so big and bright. Just look for the brightest star at night and you found it. Jupiter is over 430 million miles away, but is still so unbelievably bright that you can't miss it.
Saturn is a little tougher to identify, but there it is, about 30 degrees to the left of Jupiter. It's less than half as bright as Jupiter because it's twice as far away, about 850 million miles.
So, even though Jupiter and Saturn look relatively close together, they're still hundreds of millions of miles apart. Let's fly into each planet for a closer look. If you could fly to Jupiter like the Galileo spacecraft did, this is what it would look like.
Wow, what a view! What you're seeing is the cloud tops and weather on Jupiter. The swirling clouds form huge stripes, white ovals, and of course, the Great Red Spot.
The Great Red Spot is a hurricane the size of 2 Earths that's been raging for over 140 years.
But the red spot's fury might be winding down. Astronomers have noticed that it is shrinking, and this year showed signs of breaking up. Who knows how long it will last, so try to see it in a telescope this summer. On we go to Saturn, probably the most breathtakingly beautiful planet ever. This is what it would look like if you hitched a ride on the Cassini spacecraft.
Behold the rings which encircle the planet at various distances. They're not just 1 or 2 rings, but hundreds or even thousands of them.
Now, when I was a kid, I told my teacher that someday I would fly to Saturn and ride my bike around the rings.
Aw, that's so cute.
I know, it's impossible.
Yep, although they look like a solid road, those rings are made of individual pieces of rock and ice. They're like teeny tiny little moons. You'd be better served bringing a pogo stick instead of a bike.
One can always dream.
So, bringing Dehne back to Earth, let's advance our time to Friday night, August 9th. Did you see that?
Wow, the moon cozied up next to Jupiter. This conjunction will make quite a sight on Friday night.
You know, I love a good conjunction, but wait, there's more. On Saturday night, the moon continues on its way and sits between the two giant planets.
That will make a terrific sight.
And finally, on the night of Sunday, August 11th, the moon comes into conjunction with the ringed planet Saturn.
Awesome. This will be quite the weekend for planet and moon gazing. If you want to add a little extra fun to it, back on August 9th, point binoculars at the moon and Jupiter, and you may be able to see them both at the same time.
And try aiming a telescope at Jupiter anytime to see its 4 moons as well as Saturn to view its spectacular rings. So there you have it, a great weekend to see Jupiter, Saturn, and the moon.
Look for the moon next to Jupiter on Friday night, the moon between the planets on Saturday night, and the moon in conjunction with Saturn on Sunday night.
It's an amazing universe, and it's all there when you keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And on to your marine weather segment now. As we take a look at sea surface temperatures, we don't touch on this an awful lot, just for usually brevity of the show. But one thing that we can see very clearly in the last several months has been pretty warm temperatures around Prince William Sound, the northern Gulf, even off of southeast. Across some of our southwestern capes into Norton Sound, where temperatures have cooled down a little bit, I think, in the last couple of weeks there. But for quite a while this summer, temperatures have been very warm across the Norton Sound region and also across some of the Chukchi Coast into Kotzebue Sound. What we're going to see here in the next couple of weeks probably is some of that cooler air starting to have an impact on sea surface temperatures. And probably the first place we would see that would be up north, of course, across the Arctic Ocean. But one thing that we do also have is a lack of ice across the Arctic coast. Here is the North Slope communities and a tremendous amount of sea ice-free waters right now. This is multi-year ice, the very high concentration stuff that's made it all the way through the summer so far. And even this edge is melting back quickly as we go into mid-August now. And what is usually approaching the next 4 to 5, even 6 weeks, the sea ice minimum for the season, and there's plenty of room to continue to melt. So an unusually low sea ice year, especially when you consider the multi-year ice that is melting away. And this is the very latest as of today, August the 8th. For the very latest outlook, you can always head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice and read the seasonal outlook going ahead for the next season to come. So certainly some more useful information there, but not a lot of ice right now across North Slope. As we look at southeast, you'll notice easterlies are going to be fairly light across the inside passage. The weather that you've had today is going to be substantially quieter, I think. It may still be breezy in some cases, but the big wind that we've had today that has exacerbated fire weather concerns for the central and southern parts of southeast, even the north, again, that should be improved for your daytime on Friday. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal, 15 knots, 3-foot seas there, and north and westerlies fairly light across the outer coast with 4-foot seas, 5 to 10 knot winds there on Friday, and really more the same on Saturday. Northerlies still holding around 15 knots in the Lynn Canal on your Saturday with 3-foot seas. Otherwise, small seas and light winds for your Saturday. Looks like a nice day. Prince William Sound, southwesterlies 10 knots and 2-foot seas there. You'll see light winds outside of the Gulf and Hitchinbrook entrance. Northwesterlies over the Barren Islands, 20 knots there with 3 to 5-foot seas and a light north and easterly wind coming down Cook Inlet, expecting about 2 to 3-foot seas there on Friday, and not much of a change on Saturday. Winds may come up a little bit across southern parts of Cook Inlet, 15 knots for most places there south of Kenai, and northwesterlies stay light with small seas around Prince William Sound inside and outside of the pass and outside of Resurrection Bay. In Bristol Bay, northerlies at 15 knots. Look for 3-foot seas there, 3 to 4-foot seas across either side of the Alaska Peninsula. Northwesterlies 15 to 20 around Kodiak Island, and just east of Chignik. They're 20 knots with 4-foot seas. That comes down just a little bit on Saturday. Northerly winds still light inside of Shelikof Strait. Southerlies still light north of Cold Bay, and northerlies holding on to 15 knots and 3-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay, with a fairly nice day expected there. South and easterlies are going to pick up on Friday across the chain. We have a front working its way across the western end right now, and that's going to draw in a stronger southeasterly flow with 6 to 8 foot seas. As that front moves eastward, you can see the winds picking up across the central chain here. Here's the Pribilofs, and it hasn't quite made it there by Saturday. South and easterly winds with 25 to 30 knot winds, anywhere from 7 to 10 foot seas in most areas. Still looking at light winds and small seas for Unalaska, Dutch Harbor. Nikolsky starts to pick it up a little bit more, and west and southwesterlies are coming in behind the front at 20 to 25 with 9-foot seas there on Saturday. For the west coast, a nice day. You'll notice high pressure still giving us that southerly flow to the west, and everything that's making it over could bring in some areas of clouds, drizzle, and fog into the region. So we're going to have a little bit more of a northwesterly flow on either side of Nunivak Island. On Saturday, you'll notice the wind starting to change, especially around the Pribilofs. That southeasterly draw is picking up 20 knots with 4-foot seas, 7-foot seas around the St. Matthew Island waters, and westerlies into Norton Sound with 10 knots and 2-foot seas there on Saturday. For the west, for the north slope, an east to northeasterly flow for the Beaufort, 10 knots, 2-foot seas there on Friday. Still looking at an offshore flow from Wainwright to Cape Lisburn, 10 to 15 knots and 2 to 3-foot seas there on Friday. Winds are going to change around a little bit more to your south on Saturday, but it still looks like a northeasterly flow for the Chukchi and a westerly flow for most of the Beaufort there, about 10 to 15 knots in all areas and 2 to 3-foot seas in sea ice-free waters, as you just saw. Make sure you check out that map anytime and share it around. Weather.gov/Anchorage/TV for the latest TV weather maps as you head through the night and into early tomorrow morning. Now, colder air is dropping off of the Beaufort Seacoast tonight and is going to linger across the eastern interior. Low pressure at 1,017 millibars will hold there. Showers across southern parts of southeast tonight. The wind still blustery across central and northern parts of southeast. That should improve as we get into tomorrow. High pressure sitting across the YK Delta and just south of the Aleutians, about 1,027 to 28 millibars. That's drawing in southerly winds, moisture coming up out of the Pacific and into the Bering Sea, and eventually into the Chukchi, helping to create areas of fog and certainly IFR if you're flying around the west coast. As we get into Friday, that area of cold air is going to linger across the Alcan border. Showers and a few thunderstorms may pop up around the periphery of that cold air bubble. That's really going to start to filter out, though, as that moves east and southeast. There's another wave behind it, though. We expect to see a repeat of this as we get into Saturday and Sunday. But for most of northern southeast, south central, southwest, the weather should be fair and the sun will be out. Warm weather continues for many parts of the state.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.